Mr. Chia.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I'd like to highlight the impact on three stakeholders: vehicle repair and maintenance companies, EV charging operators, and residents. First, I'd like to speak about this bill's impact on employees in vehicle repair and maintenance companies. With the expansion of the EV charging network, consumers may now be more inclined to purchase an EV as it poses greater convenience to them and contributes better to Singapore's Green Plan 2030. What would then be the indirect impact on employees in vehicle maintenance and repair companies, and how would the government ensure that the employees do not lose their jobs because the skills are now deemed less relevant, and if the workforce does not have the skills required as the auto industry shifts to electric vehicles and digital services? In the US, for instance, earlier this year, in August, Ford terminated 3,000 staff, both permanent and contract staff, in mostly North America and India. This was part of their restructuring efforts to better compete in the race to develop EVs. Reason for termination was due to employees' lack of skills to shift to EVs and digital services in car manufacturing. According to CNN in 2019, building an electric car requires about 30% less labor than a traditional internal combustion engine ICE vehicle. In general, EVs have lesser parts than an ICE vehicle. While Singapore does not manufacture ICE vehicles, we do have considerable ICE vehicle repair and maintenance workshops. The amount of repair and maintenance works is directly proportional to the amount of manufactured parts in a vehicle. Second, the impact on EV charging operators. By 2025, every multi-story car park will have at least 3 EV charging points. The proposed licensing regime raised 3 challenges. First, higher compliance costs. Second, the tedious entry into market may prevent smaller businesses from attempting this shift and hence limiting market competition. And third, the licensing and certification costs may subsequently be passed on to consumers. While MOT and LT propose keeping compliance costs reasonable, has there been an estimated range for this? What would the payment structure be like? Will it be a one-time payment, for instance, a monthly installment, or are there any other renewable fees? Under the licensing requirements, EVCOs are subjected to the following set of requirements, such as data sharing, third-party liability insurance, payment methods, cybersecurity protections, and service downtime recovery. In this situation, what if EVCOs are unable to afford to ensure relevant cybersecurity protection and liability insurance? In the future, when there are newer types of technology with EV chargers, would EVCOs need to go through the entire licensing process again? And what if the costs associated with that are prohibitive? Lastly, this bill states the need for 2 competent persons to certify a charging unit for both deployment and regular checks. Will the ministry provide guidance of the endorsements costs which competent persons should charge, or will the ministry leave this to market pricing? Moving on to the second part of my speech, where I seek to clarify a few technical points in the bill. In Clause 25 imposes an obligation on the registered responsible persons for an EV charger to cause EV chargers to be inspected by a prescribed competent person in accordance with the prescribed frequency and standards. Within domestic premises, such as landed property with fixed charging stations, the registered responsible person are subjected to these periodic inspections. How then will LTA ensure that the competent person has the authority to enter private premises? For example, SP officers have previously faced challenges in conducting checks on these private estates' power meters when it was installed inside the homes. Clause 24 deals with the unlawful installation of fixed EV chargers. The proposed framework will require in future 2 competent persons, a LEW and a charger equipment specialist, with different expertise to inspect the safety of the charger. First, as the bill is vague on how the ministry will determine if one is a charger equipment specialist, it will be useful if there is a framework in identifying this competent person. The eligibility criteria can take reference from the licensed electrical worker skill structure to be considered as an industry specialist competent person. Second, will LTA look into having a skills transformation roadmap to allow the upskilling of workers to be a charger equipment specialist? Also, is LTA working with CET institutions to create curriculums to ensure that sufficient training capacity dovetails with the demand of training of charger equipment specialists? How many competent persons can LTA produce in the following 5 years and beyond? And do we anticipate enough talent in Singapore to increase the volume of competent persons required by the market? Training centers may not be able to cope with the sudden influx of demand for training. Regulators will need to take into account a lead time required, as we do not want a situation where providers are not able to enter the market because they were not able to complete the relevant training by the deadline. I think these are similar points made by the Honourable Members Sakandati Supab and Mr. Ang Wei Neng earlier. The availability of sufficient charger equipment specialists is essential for timely deployment of EV charger and ensure market price for endorsements remains competitive. This can also address potential job losses in the ICE vehicle repair maintenance industry. Third, as it is common for hardware manufacturers to enforce the need to engage their own staff or approve maintenance contractors for repairs and servicing, does LTA anticipate such market practices imposed by EV charger manufacturers? If so, would independent charger equipment specialists be able to certify a charger is fit for use? This would have implications to the cost levied on EVCOs and end users. Lastly, can the same competent person perform the role of the LEW and charger equipment specialist? Under the Consumer Protection Act, Part 2, Clause 5, there is a provision for registering a controlled goods supplier. In Clause 6, there is also a provision to add items into controlled goods list. Hence, would there be a reconciliation between the EV charging bill and the Consumer Protection Act? Would EV chargers be added to this list, be parked under the Consumer Protection Act's safety mark? Since there is already an existing safety regulations under controlled goods, parking EV chargers under the same regulation would prevent double certification and duplication of man-hours efforts by regulators. I wish to also highlight MCSC's related Act amendments and the questions and concerns raised by these stakeholders when I interacted with them. First, there are some challenges that can result in social issues, the first of which is the issue of idling. Residents may become unhappy with MCSD and town councils, and neighbourly disputes may occur. How can we prevent idling? Market-based solutions such as imposing an idling charge may not solve the issues, as EVCOs technically achieve better unit economics for imposing idling charges. I seek the Ministry to study this potential issue and update the bylaws that provides town councils and MCSDs greater authority to enforce penalties on idling. Second, MCSDs have shared that despite the amendments to the Building Maintenance and Strata Management Act, where the threshold for MCSDs will be a simple majority of votes, there are still challenges. When the demand for EV goes up, who will bear the expansion and upgrading costs of substations for higher power provisions? As condominiums are considered private housing, there are no government grants to co-fund power upgrades charges. Some condominiums do not have sufficient power supply to allocate for EV charges. The LTA provides the EV Common Charger Grant to support condominiums in installing EV chargers. I'd like to ask on the application and disbursement rate for this LTA grant. As there are now market-based solutions where EVCOs lease lots from MCSDs to install chargers and recover investments from the revenue of usage, is this grant still relevant? Would providing grants for MCSD to co-fund power upgrades be considered instead? In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, sir, I raised three broad areas in my speech. First, the impact on relevant stakeholders, vehicle repair maintenance companies, EV charging operators, and residents. Second, the relevant concerns in specific clauses of the bill. And lastly, questions raised by MCST. Notwithstanding my clarifications and suggestions, I support the bill. Thank you.